Look at this map of the Indian Ocean. What you're seeing right now is arguably the most strategically important body of water on the planet. And I'm not exaggerating. This isn't just about shipping routes or military bases. This is about the future of global power itself. Let's start with the basics. The Indian Ocean is massive. We're talking about 70 million square kilometers of water. It's bordered by Africa on the west, Asia on the north and east, and Australia down south. But here's what makes it truly special. It's the gateway to some of the world's most critical choke points. The Strait of Malacca, the Strait of Hormuz, the Bab el-Mandeb. These aren't just geographic features, they're economic lifelines. Think about it this way. Every single day, roughly 80% of the world's maritime oil trade passes through the Indian Ocean. That's not a small number. That's the lifeblood of global commerce. If something goes wrong in these waters, the ripple effects are felt everywhere. Gas prices spike, supply chains collapse, economies suffer. And that's exactly why every major power on Earth is paying attention to what happens here. The Indian Ocean isn't new to strategic importance. It's been a crucial trade route for centuries. The ancient Silk Road didn't just cross land, it moved across these waters. Merchants, explorers, and traders have been navigating these routes for thousands of years. But what's different today is the intensity of competition. We're not just talking about trade anymore. We're talking about military presence, geopolitical influence, and the reshaping of global power dynamics. China has invested heavily in ports across the region. India is expanding its naval capabilities. The United States maintains a significant military presence, and smaller nations are caught in the middle, trying to navigate these competing interests while protecting their own sovereignty and economic interests. The strategic importance of the Indian Ocean breaks down into several key dimensions. First, there's the resource dimension. The region surrounding the Indian Ocean is rich in natural resources: oil, natural gas, rare earth minerals, and fisheries. The Middle East alone accounts for about 30% of the world's proven oil reserves, and most of that oil travels through Indian Ocean routes to reach markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. Then there's the trade dimension. More than half of the world's merchant fleet tonnage passes through these waters. We're talking about trillions of dollars in annual trade. Everything from electronics manufactured in Asia to agricultural products from East Africa to energy resources from the Gulf. All of it moves through the Indian Ocean. The economic interdependence is staggering. A disruption here doesn't just affect one country. But here's where it gets interesting. Beyond trade and resources, the Indian Ocean is increasingly a stage for military competition. China's Belt and Road Initiative has created a network of ports and infrastructure projects across the region. Hambantota Port in Sri Lanka, Gwadar Port in Pakistan, ports in Djibouti and Tanzania. On the surface, these look like commercial investments. But strategically, they give China leverage and presence throughout the region. Let me give you a specific example of how this works. When Sri Lanka couldn't pay back loans for the Hambantota port development, which was financed by Chinese banks, Sri Lanka was forced to hand over a 99-year lease of the port to a Chinese state-owned company in 2017. This wasn't just a financial transaction. It gave China a strategic foothold in the Indian Ocean, a port facility that could potentially be used for military purposes and leverage over Sri Lankan foreign policy. This is the real game being played. Infrastructure investments that look economic on the surface, but carry enormous strategic weight underneath. India, recognizing this shift, has been strengthening its own naval capabilities and partnerships. The United States, concerned about the balance of power shifting away from the West, maintains naval forces and conducts regular operations in these waters. And then there are smaller regional powers like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Thailand, all trying to protect their interests while maintaining strategic flexibility in an increasingly complex environment. If you're finding this breakdown of global strategy fascinating, you need to understand how these power plays actually work. Hit that like button so more people see this content, because understanding geopolitics is understanding your future. And trust me, there's so much more strategic depth to cover about the Indian Ocean. Stick with me, because the next part reveals why specific choke points could literally reshape global economics overnight. Now let's zoom out across the entire Indian Ocean region and understand the geopolitical landscape. The region is home to nearly 2.5 billion people. That's about a third of humanity. Major economies like India, Indonesia, and Australia all depend heavily on Indian Ocean trade. Energy-dependent nations in Europe and East Asia rely on resources flowing through these waters. The growth of the middle class in Asia means increasing demand for resources, manufactured goods, and energy. All of this flows through the Indian Ocean. And as demand increases, competition for control and influence in these waters intensifies. The stakes couldn't be higher. We're not talking about abstract strategic concepts. We're talking about real economic prosperity, energy security, and the ability of nations to feed their populations and power their economies. Let me break down some specific strategic choke points and why they matter so much. The Strait of Malacca, located between Malaysia and Indonesia, is the world's busiest maritime choke point. Every single day, roughly 94,000 barrels of oil pass through this narrow passage. It's only about 550 miles long, but it handles more traffic than the Suez Canal. If something were to happen here, if piracy increased, if there were a conflict, or if one nation tried to restrict passage, the impact would be immediate and severe. The global economy would shudder. Then there's the Strait of Hormuz, between Iran and Oman. This passage connects the Persian Gulf to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean beyond. About 20% of the world's oil passes through here. It's a critical choke point that's been a focus of geopolitical tension for decades. And the Bab el-Mandeb, between Yemen and Djibouti, connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean. This passage has become increasingly important, especially with the growth of trade between Asia and Europe through the Suez Canal route. Here's why this matters today in concrete terms. In 2022, when tensions escalated between the United States and Iran, there were genuine concerns about what would happen if Iran decided to block the Strait of Hormuz. Analysts estimated that if that strait were closed for even a few weeks, global oil prices can spike by 50 to 100%. That's not speculation, that's economic reality. A single nation's decision to restrict passage through one choke point could send shockwaves through the entire global economy. Unemployment would rise, inflation would spike, recessions could follow. This is why the United States, Europe, and other major economies are so concerned about maintaining freedom of navigation in these waters. It's not abstract geopolitical theory. It's the difference between economic stability and economic crisis for billions of people. The security challenges in the Indian Ocean are real and multifaceted. Piracy has been a persistent problem, particularly off the coast of Somalia. While piracy incidents have decreased from their peak in the early 2010s, when there were over 200 reported incidents annually, the threat remains. Then there's the issue of maritime terrorism, organized crime, and human trafficking. The vastness of the ocean makes it difficult to patrol and control. Nations have limited resources to secure these waters effectively. And then there's the military dimension. As powers build up their naval capabilities, the risk of miscalculation or conflict increases. We've seen this with incidents in the South China Sea, tensions between India and Pakistan, and the broader competition between China and the United States for influence and control. India's role in this region is particularly significant. India has a coastline of over 7,000 kilometers along the Indian Ocean. The ocean is literally named after the country. India's economic prosperity depends heavily on trade through these waters. Indian ports handle millions of containers annually. And strategically, India sees itself as a natural regional power, with responsibilities for maintaining stability and freedom of navigation. India has been developing its naval capabilities, conducting joint exercises with other democracies, and promoting the concept of Indo-Pacific stability. China's approach is different, but equally strategic. China is geographically distant from the Indian Ocean, but it's economically dependent on trade flowing through these waters. China's Belt and Road Initiative represents a comprehensive strategy to build infrastructure, establish influence, and create economic dependencies throughout the region. The United States maintains a significant military presence in the Indian Ocean region. The US Navy conducts regular patrols, joint exercises with regional partners, and maintains bases in countries like Diego Garcia. The Quad, which includes the United States, India, Japan, and Australia, has become increasingly important in Indian Ocean strategy. The Quad represents a commitment to maintaining freedom of navigation, supporting democratic values, and countering what these nations see as destabilizing behavior. Looking forward, the strategic importance of the Indian Ocean will only increase. Asia's continued economic growth means increasing demand for resources and trade. The transition to renewable energy will create new strategic interests around rare earth minerals and other resources. Climate change will create new pressures and potentially new conflicts over resources and territory. The economic value generated by Indian Ocean commerce is estimated at over $2 trillion annually. That's more than the GDP of most countries on Earth. When you think about it that way, you start to understand why nations are willing to invest so heavily in military capabilities and strategic infrastructure in this region. The economic stakes are literally among the highest on the planet. Here's the reality. The Indian Ocean is where the future of global power is being decided right now. It's where economics, military strategy, and geopolitics collide. Understanding this is understanding the world you're about to inherit. So if you want to stay ahead of global trends and understand the forces shaping our future, subscribe to this channel. We break down complex geopolitical issues in ways that actually make sense. And right now, I want you to watch this next video where we dive even deeper into how specific nations are positioning themselves for dominance. Because the strategic move happening in the Indian Ocean today will determine the balance of power for the next 50 years. Click that video and let's keep this conversation going.